Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This is where we really get into the weeds of complex source material about, well, us, our behavior, our consciousness. We try to pull it apart and find those insights that might actually change how you see things.
That's right. And today we've got a really potent set of sources focusing on identity, specifically the ego, or what some call the surface self.
And the big idea, the thread running through all of them is pretty staggering, isn't it? That this self we construct, this identity, is actually the main engine behind most of our unhappiness.
It really is. It's a profound claim.
So our mission today is, well, ambitious. We're going to try and map out exactly how this surface self gets built, right from, the first time a kid says I, all the way to the complex baggage of history and status we carry around as adults.
And crucially, how that construction traps us, how it leads to suffering. And then, importantly, what these sources suggest as a way out, a spiritual practice that sounds simple but is actually quite radical.
Okay, but let's start with the big paradox you mentioned. Because usually we think, oh, I'm unhappy because my boss said this, or because I lost money, or, something external happened.
Exactly. That's the default assumption.
Yeah.
But what if? What if the sources are right and maybe, say, 95% of our day-to-day unhappiness isn't actually caused by the event itself? What if it's generated internally by the story we tell ourselves about the event? The mental narrative, this shouldn't happen, this is unfair, this means I'm a failure.
That layer of judgment and interpretation we add on top.
Precisely. And understanding that distinction, really getting it, that's presented as the key, the shortcut maybe, to a kind of freedom.
Okay, so let's dig into that construction process. The building blocks of this surface self, where does it even begin? The sources define it not as a solid thing, but more like a collection, right?
Yeah, a shifting collection of mental narratives, ideas, identifications, things we believe are us but maybe aren't fundamentally.
It's a construct.
It absolutely is. And you can see it forming in childhood. It's fascinating. Little kids, when they first start talking, they also don't use I right away.
Oh, right. They talk in the third person. Billy wants juice.
Exactly. Billy wants juice. There's an awareness of a body named Billy, maybe, but not yet that central conceptual I.
And then the big leap happens, usually around age 2, they say.
Typically, yeah. That word I, it's more than just a sound or a label.
It changes everything.
It does. The sources call it the primordial thought form. Think of it like a tiny magnetic seed, the thought I, once that appears in the mind.
Things start sticking to it.
That's a great way to put it. Other thoughts, concepts, experiences, memories, they just start accumulating around it almost automatically, building this sense of a separate self.
And it's not like the child is consciously deciding, I'm going to build an ego now. It's just the mind doing its labeling thing, but attaching it all to this core I.
Right. The mind needs to make sense of the world and needs to categorize. But here, the categories are becoming definitional. The I thought, on its own, is kind of empty, isn't it?
Definition, boundaries.
Exactly, boundaries. And it gets those boundaries by identifying with things, by saying, this is me, which also means that is not me.
Okay, so the I is the magnetic core. What's the first thing that usually gets stuck to it? What's the first big identification?
Ownership, the concept of mine.
Ah, the toy.
The classic example, the toy. It shifts from being just a toy, an object in the world, to being my toy.
Yeah.
Part of me, linked to that I.
And this, the sources argue, is where suffering first really kicks in.
It seems to be the first taste of it. Because think about that scene, we've all seen it. Another kid takes the toy, or a parent puts it away.
Instant meltdown, wailing, not just annoyance, but like deep distress.
Deep suffering, yeah. And here's the crucial point we need to pause on. What caused that suffering? Was it the physical movement of the plastic toy?
No, obviously not. The toy moving is neutral.
Right. The suffering came from the concept in the child's mind. The idea, my toy, was fused with the idea I. The toy became an extension of the self, and when the toy was threatened, the self felt threatened, diminished.
Because the toy isn't permanent. It can be taken, broken, lost. It's unstable.
Exactly. And the ego, by identifying with something unstable, guarantees future suffering. It's inevitable.
So this is dukkha, that Buddhist idea.
Precisely. Often translated as suffering, but maybe better as unsatisfactoriness, inherent instability. It's the friction that arises when we attach our sense of self, our well-being, to anything that is, by its very nature, impermanent.
Which is pretty much everything in the phenomenal world, right? The toy, our bodies, our jobs, our relationships.
Everything that has a form, yes. If the ego builds its identity on that shifting sand, the collapse and the pain, it's just a matter of time. The identification is the root of the pain.
It's not about avoiding toys then. It's about understanding that mechanism of identification.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And once the ego learns this trick, I can define myself by attaching to things. It just keeps doing it, applying it to more and more complex stuff.
Right. It graduates from toys. What comes next? What else gets stuck to that core I?
Well, a huge one is personal history.
Yeah.
Your story. Everything that's ever happened to you, everything you think you've achieved, all your failures.
It becomes this curated narrative. I'm the person who went through X, or I'm the one who accomplished Y.
Exactly. A mental biography that you constantly edit and replay, and it defines who you think you are. It creates the edges of the I.
Then there's the cultural layer, right? Collective culture, how the world around you shapes that I.
Hugely important and often invisible to us. We don't build our egos in a vacuum. The society we're in provides the raw materials, the available identities.
Like the example they gave growing up in, say, Australia versus Saudi Arabia. The way the ego identifies might be the same, but the content it grabs onto is completely different.
Totally. In one place, the I might be defined by independence, breaking rules, individual achievement. In another, it might be defined by family duty, tradition, adherence to the group.
The prison bars are painted different colors, as they put it, but it's still a conceptual prison.
A prison built from ideas. And it goes even deeper, into ancestry and historical identity.
This is where it gets really complex. Identifying with things that happened centuries ago.
Yeah, using shared history, sometimes very painful history, as building material for the current self.
Now, hold on. Are the sources saying that history doesn't matter? Or that acknowledging past wrongs is just ego? Because, that feels problematic. Surely that awareness is important.
That's a really important clarification. No, the sources aren't dismissing history or the reality of historical injustice. The point is about how that history is used by the ego.
Okay.
It's when history, even factual history, becomes fuel for what they call a collective victim identity.
So it's about using the past primarily to define the present self in opposition to others. We are the people who suffered X at the hands of Y, and that defines us now.
Precisely. You see it taught to children sometimes, this idea that your core identity today is based on events from 300 years ago, inflicted by them upon us.
The historical facts might be real, but the ego grabs onto the narrative of victimhood because it provides a very strong, seemingly unshakable sense of identity.
Yes. You
Yes.
feel solid.
Yeah.
It feels righteous. Even if the identity itself is built on pain, the ego prefers a painful definition to having no clear definition. It gives it boundaries, a sense of specialness, even if it's a negative specialness.
This constructed self, this adult I, carries all this baggage, personal history, cultural programming, maybe ancestral narratives.
It still feels incomplete, but the sources say the adult I feels semi-complete, but there's this underlying hum of not enough, a feeling of being vaguely undefined.
Which leads to that constant looking outside, right? For things to add to the I, to bolster it, to fill that perceived gap.
Exactly. A bottomless pit, as you said earlier. It manifests in a few key ways in the adult world, according to these texts. First, achievement.
But specifically, achievement for the sake of the I. Getting the promotion, winning the award, things that reflect back and enhance that self-image.
If the achievement doesn't boost the ego, it often feels hollow. Second, possessions. The classic consumer trap. If I just get that car, if I just reach that income level, then I'll finally feel whole.
Which never really works long-term.
Never. And third, recognition. The deep need for others to see you as special, important, maybe the best. Validation from the outside.
And people can spend their whole lives chasing these piling up achievements, possessions, awards, and still feel that fundamental not enoughness because the foundation itself, the conceptual I, is inherently unstable.
That instability drives the ego's core need, superiority. It has to feel better than, or at least different from, something or someone else to maintain its sense of existence.
Okay, let's break down how that superiority manifests. There's the obvious kind, the traditional or positive ego.
Right. Identifying with things generally seen as good or excellent, being the successful CEO, the brilliant artist, or, well, having the most fantastic physique.
Ah, yes, the anecdote about the guy walking shirtless by the harbor.
Yeah, it's a striking image. His body wasn't just functional, it was being used as a tool for the ego to generate a feeling of superiority over others perceived as less fit. The thought isn't, I feel healthy, it's, look at me, I am superior.
The identification is with the idea of having a superior body.
Exactly. But it's temporary, isn't it? For a while, the sources say, time eventually catches up, The body changes, the job ends, the success fades, the suffering is always lurking.
And if the physical route isn't available or it fades, the ego often shifts to the intellectual ego.
Oh, a very powerful one. Especially in certain circles, the identity becomes, I'm intelligent, I know more, I've read more books than you.
It's less about genuine curiosity and more about using knowledge as a weapon, right? To feel superior.
Often, yes. It's that need to make the clever comment, to correct the small error, not really to help, but to subtly put the other person down and elevate oneself. You see it online constantly, people tearing arguments apart just to prove they're smarter.
Establishing that intellectual pecking order.
Absolutely. Then there are subtler forms like the social and cultural ego, identifying with your background, your accent, your education.
Like the example of how pronouncing a word in England could instantly signal your social class and create that sense of us and them.
Yeah, using social markers to maintain a sense of separation and often superiority. It's all about defining the I by what it's not.
Okay, but what if someone doesn't have the great body, the high status job, the fancy background? The ego doesn't just give up, does it? It still needs that feeling of specialness.
No, it's incredibly resourceful. If the positive avenues are blocked, it performs a fascinating flip. It adopts the victim identity or negative superiority.
So instead of I'm the best, it becomes I'm the biggest sufferer.
Exactly. Nobody has endured what I have, or my group has suffered more than any other. It finds superiority in the perceived depth or injustice of its suffering. The sources noted this identity seems quite fashionable currently.
It can latch onto real personal trauma or tap into those collective historical narratives we talked about, but the function is the same, using suffering to build a strong, defined, and strangely powerful ego identity.
It creates this sense of being uniquely wronged, which paradoxically gives the ego a feeling of solidity and moral high ground. It becomes a core part of who you are, and any suggestion that maybe you could move beyond it feels like an attack on your very being.
So this need for superiority, whether positive or negative, always needs an other to compare against, which leads to this really crucial insight that ego needs enemies.
It loves its enemies, as the sources put it. Conflict defines it. If I'm fighting against you or against them, then I know exactly who I am. My boundaries are crystal clear.
It gives it shape and purpose.
Absolutely. And if personal enemies aren't readily available, the annoying colleague, the rival company, the ego will find or create them on a collective level.
This is where we see entire groups, even nations, defining themselves primarily by who they oppose.
Right. The sources mention historical examples like regimes built entirely on the idea of external threats, internal enemies. That constant state of siege keeps the collective ego unified and strong.
And we see it today, don't we? Political tribes, online factions, even sports rivalries sometimes. The sense of us gets incredibly strong by hating them.
It's potent fuel. Now we know who we are, the ego cries. We are the good ones fighting the bad ones. It creates a huge amount of division and suffering, obviously, but it serves the ego's desperate need for clear definition.
Okay, so if the ego needs enemies, needs definition, needs superiority, what's the easiest, most common way it achieves this day to day?
Complaining.
Ah, simple as that.
It's the ego's go-to tool. Whether you voice it out loud or it's just that constant nagging commentary inside your head, complaining functions as an egoic device.
How so? How does complaining build the ego?
By making something, a person, a situation, the weather, the traffic, into a temporary enemy. When you complain, you implicitly position yourself as right and the situation as wrong.
Which instantly gives you a little hit of superiority.
Exactly. You become the judge, the one who knows better, the victim of circumstance, and the world, let's be honest, provides an almost inexhaustible supply of things to complain about.
People are difficult, things go wrong. It's an enormous source, as they say.
It really is. And if you're hooked on complaining, you actually start looking for things to be wrong, like the hotel example. You check in, and instead of just experiencing the room, the ego immediately scans for flaws.
The shower pressure, the TV remote, the view.
What's wrong here? What can I find fault with? And the internal monologue, it can be relentless. Even listening to something like this, the ego might be chipping in. This is too slow. I already knew this. Why are they using that example?
Every judgment reinforces the judging eye.
That's the payoff. So the recommendation, which sounds simple but is incredibly challenging, is to start catching that complaining thought, to notice it as a spiritual practice.
Okay, but we need to be careful here. There's a difference between useless complaining and actually taking necessary action, right? If the hotel bed is dirty, you need to do something.
Crucial distinction. Complaining in this context is the useless arguing with reality. It's the mental friction against what is that doesn't actually change anything productive.
Let's use that hotel bed scenario. How does it play out egoically versus non-egoically?
Okay, useless complaining, egoic way. You march down to the desk, maybe already fuming. The interaction isn't just about getting clean sheets, it's about making them wrong.
How dare you put me in this room? This is unacceptable. Your staff are incompetent.
Right, you make the receptionist the enemy. You feel righteous indignation. Your ego gets a massive boost from being the wronged, superior customer. The problem might get solved, but you've generated negativity and reinforced your ego.
Okay, now the alternative. Action without ego.
You go to the desk, you state the facts, calmly and neutrally. Hi, I'm in room 305. It looks like the sheets weren't changed and the bathroom needs cleaning. Could you please arrange for that?
No blame, no drama, just the facts and a request for a resolution.
Exactly. The situation gets resolved, hopefully even more efficiently, because there's no emotional charge. But here's the kicker.
It's not satisfying to the ego.
Bingo. Because the ego didn't get its fix. It didn't get to be righteously indignant. It didn't get to feel superior by making someone else wrong. It just got the problem solved.
That's a really powerful distinction. It applies to so many small things too, doesn't it? Getting cut off in traffic.
Oh, absolutely, the egoic way. You idiot. Learn to drive. Who gave you a license? Pure judgment, pure superiority, zero practical effect except raising your own blood pressure.
The non-egoic way.
Hit the brakes. Observe. Okay, that car cut in front. Accept the reality. Continue driving. Maybe take a breath. No internal drama manufactured.
So all those little internal grumbles, the slow supermarket line, the person talking loudly on their phone, each one is a tiny act of ego reinforcement, a little dose of self-created suffering.
Every single time. And they add up.
This leads perfectly into the solution, the practice offered in the sources. It seems to center around this idea of non-interference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Beautifully shown in that Zen master story.
It really is. You want to recount that one? It captures the essence so well.
Sure. So there's this disciple, right? Been studying hard for years, feels like he's getting nowhere. He's about to go traveling for a year and asks his Zen master for, like, the ultimate portable spiritual practice.
And the master gives him this phrase, "Thanks for everything, I have no complaint whatsoever." Tells him to repeat it constantly, promises enlightenment if he does.
So the disciple heads off, diligently repeating the words day in, day out, through good times, bad times. Thanks for everything, I have no complaint whatsoever. A whole year of this.
He comes back, and he's clearly exasperated.
Yeah, he basically confronts the master. I did it, I said the words thousands of times, and look at me, I'm still not enlightened. You gave me a useless practice.
The irony is just beautiful, isn't it? He's complaining about the failure of the non-complaining practice. His ego is right there, fully inflated.
And the master's response is the key. He doesn't argue, doesn't get defensive.
No. He just looks the fuming disciple, fully accepting the reality of his student's frustration, and then with genuine presence, he repeats the phrase himself. Thanks for everything, I have no complaint whatsoever.
And that's when the penny drops for the disciple. He suddenly realizes he'd just been mouthing the words, mechanically repeating them while his mind was still constantly judging, resisting, complaining internally.
He had the form, but not the substance. He lacked the underlying consciousness of acceptance that the master embodied in that moment.
So that phrase really contains the whole practice, doesn't it? Two core components.
Exactly. First, gratitude. Thanks for everything. Shifting the focus immediately from what's wrong or lacking to acknowledging the gift of existence itself, whatever its current form. It's an instant reframe.
And second, the really radical part. Non-interference or non-complaint. I have no complaint whatsoever.
Which doesn't mean pretending things are perfect. It means stopping the mind's useless argument with reality. Ceasing the constant mental commentary about how things should be different from how they are in this present moment.
Because the ego feeds on that argument, on that non-alignment with the present.
It thrives on it. The present moment, just as it is often perceived as a threat to the ego's stability, its plans, its preferences, so it fights it. Complaining, judging, that's how it maintains its sense of control, its role as the superior judge.
Can we unpack isness a bit more, aligning with the isness of things? What does that actually look like in practice?
It means experiencing reality directly, before the layer of mental interpretation gets slapped on, before the labels of good, bad, like, dislike.
So the dirty hotel sheets are, the traffic jam is, my body aching is. It's accepting the raw data of the moment without the immediate story about it.
Precisely. You perceive the situation neutrally. This is what's happening right now. Acceptance doesn't mean liking it or wanting it to continue forever. It means not being in mental conflict with the fact that it is happening right now.
And that acceptance starves the ego.
Because the ego needs conflict. It needs something to push against. When you genuinely accept what is, even if it's unpleasant, the fight dissolves. There's no fuel for the argument.
But again, this isn't passivity. You still get the sheets changed.
Absolutely, you take appropriate action, but the action arises from a place of clarity and presence, not from egoic reactivity, blame, or the need to be right.
The sources use the example of looking at a rainy day. That really highlights the difference perception makes.
It's a perfect illustration. Option 1. The egoic narrative. You look out the window, see the rain, and the mind immediately kicks in. Ugh, great. Another miserable gray day. I hate this weather. Now I'm stuck inside. This is depressing.
And instantly you feel depressed, irritated. You've generated suffering purely from the mental story imposed on the weather.
Exactly. Now, option 2. Presence. You look out the same window. You see the rain. You notice the drops on the glass, the sound, the gray light. You just observe.
No story, no complaint, no judgment.
Just the direct perception of rain.
Yeah.
And in that space, without the negative commentary, the experience is entirely different. It's just rain. Maybe there's even a quiet sense of aliveness, of wonder, or simple neutrality. The suffering is gone because the narrative is gone.
Which means you don't necessarily need to move to Hawaii to be happy.
You really don't. If you take your complaining egoic mind with you to Hawaii, you'll just find new things to complain about after the novelty wears off. The sun's too strong. The tourists are annoying. Why is everything so expensive?
The location changes, but the mechanism of suffering remains the same if the mind hasn't shifted. The rain, the traffic, the difficult people, they're just phenomena. The suffering comes from our mental reaction, our non-acceptance, our complaining.
Stop the interference, align with the isness, and the suffering diminishes dramatically.
Now, for a lot of people, this kind of deep shift doesn't just happen because they read about it or hear a podcast. It often takes, well, hitting rock bottom, doesn't it?
Sadly, often yes. It frequently begins with that stark realization, I have been unhappy for a very, very long time. Something is fundamentally wrong with how I'm experiencing life.
And that pain forces what the sources called the enormous realization, which is
That the bulk of their suffering, even in the face of genuine hardship, like, say, being a refugee or losing everything financially or grieving a loss, didn't actually come from the external situation itself. It came from the internal narrative about the situation.
the story of this shouldn't be happening to me, my life is ruined, it's all unfair.
Exactly. And this applies just as much to the big crises as it does to the tiny everyday irritations. That slight feeling of, I don't want this, or he shouldn't do that, the sources say that's already a form of unhappiness, a low-grade resistance to reality.
And over years, those little resistances can build into this huge narrative. My life is problematic and unhappy. The ego constructs a whole identity around being hard done by.
Even when facing truly awful objective events, the additional suffering generated by the mental story, the resistance, is often far greater than the unavoidable pain of the event itself.
Which leads to this almost paradoxical idea that intense suffering, the collapse of things the ego relies on, can actually be a doorway.
A great blessing, as one source put it, though it certainly doesn't feel like it at the time. When the structures we identify with crumble, our health, our relationships, our job, our reputation, our finances, it's incredibly painful for the ego.
Because its foundations are being ripped away.
Yes, but that very pain, that collapse, can create an opening, a crack in the shell of the ego. It forces us to confront the question, if I'm not my job, not my relationship, not my health, then who am I?
It helps you see what you are not.
Exactly. For many, losing a big piece of that external egoic identity is the only way they start to glimpse the deeper awareness, the presence that lies beneath it all. The suffering literally breaks off chunks of the false self.
It reminds me of that quote, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. The suffering breaks the surface eye and allows something deeper, the light of consciousness perhaps, to emerge.
It's a painful, often terrifying, but ultimately liberating process for many. It forces a deepening.
And the good news, perhaps, is that many people listening might have already gone through such a collapse, big or small, and that's what led them to explore these deeper questions in the first place. The suffering served its purpose.
Hopefully, yes. But the ultimate aim, the invitation from these sources, is to reach a point where you don't need life to hit you over the head with a catastrophe to wake up.
To consciously choose the deepening.
Yes. By understanding these mechanisms, how the ego builds identity, how it uses complaining, how it resists the present moment, you gain the ability to see it happening in real time.
You can catch yourself getting lost in a toxic narrative, in useless complaining, and consciously choose a different response. Choose presence, choose alignment, choose non-interference.
It becomes a conscious choice rather than waiting for suffering to force your hand.
Okay, this has been a really deep dive into the ego's workings. Let's try and crystallize the absolute key takeaways for everyone listening.
All right. First, maybe the most fundamental point. The ego, the sense of I we usually operate from, isn't solid. It's a mental construct built by identifying with things that are inherently unstable: possessions, roles, history, beliefs, even victimhood.
And that identification with the impermanent is the direct source of what the Buddhists call dukkha, that underlying current of unsatisfactoriness or suffering.
Second key point.
Mhm.
The ego's primary food source, its daily bread, is mental interference, especially complaining, constantly arguing with what is, finding fault, judging situations and people. This reinforces the ego by creating a temporary feeling of being right or superior.
It's the engine that keeps the illusion running.
And third, the way out, the practice, is deceptively simple. Alignment with the isness of things, cultivating gratitude for what is, and consciously dropping the habit of complaint and mental argument.
Which includes taking necessary action, but doing so from presence without the need to make anyone or anything wrong.
Exactly. Action without egoic contamination.
So as we wrap up and you go back into your day, maybe holding these ideas lightly, here's something to ponder, a final thought from these sources.
If it's true that most of our suffering doesn't come from what happens, but from the story we tell ourselves about what happens, consider one major situation in your life right now that you define as awful or unbearable. Maybe it's tied to a personal story or even one of those collective victim narratives.
And just ask yourself, what would happen if, just as an experiment, maybe for just 5 minutes, you could consciously decide to drop the narrative about it? Not deny the facts, but let go of the story, the judgment, the complaint.
And instead, just perceive the raw isness of the situation in this present moment. Without the mental overlay, what would remain? What would that feel like?
Something to explore, perhaps. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.